On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
When you're on the stage and you're holding a mic and you're inciting an entire crowd against two members of the audience, that could get out of hand.
Well, it could have got
quickly.
very out of hand very quickly. I mean, imagine if somebody had grabbed you or there had been some physical confrontation.
I think it is very likely that if we had refused to leave the space, if we had lingered for over a minute, I think it would have come to physical violence.
And that is in a London theatre in 2024. Hard to believe, isn't it? Let's get a reaction to all of what we've been talking about from the panel. They're here with me, editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater, writer and commentator, Candice Holdsworth, and, of course, barrister and broadcaster, Mr Andrew Eborn.
Of course.
Tom, let me start with you. We ran that interview last night, and a big reaction to it, of course, as well, because it's so incongruous, really, physical confrontation.
I think it is very likely that if we had refused to leave the space, if we had lingered for over a minute, I think it would have come to physical violence.
And that is in a London theatre in 2024. Hard to believe, isn't it? Let's get a reaction to all of what we've been talking about from the panel. They're here with me, editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater, writer and commentator, Candice Holdsworth, and, of course, barrister and broadcaster, Mr Andrew Eborn.
Of course.
But it has also become, Andrew, a kind of mark of, wokeness, isn't it, now? In order to be, anti-Semitic, you kind of have to want social justice, and you have to see Israel as the colonial master, and it's all their fault. No matter what the Palestinians do, they're entitled to do it because they've been treated so badly for so long. And it's simply the wrong definition of history. Even if you want to be completely even-handed, and you can, admit that Israel may have done some things that they should not have done over various different pieces of history, but nevertheless, Israel is still a democracy. It's still the only part of the only part of that world that is the only country where you can actually vote for somebody to be the leader of it. You can't vote anywhere else. And I find it astonishing that it seems to be getting worse rather than better.
No, you put it so well, Mike. It's absolutely appalling. And I live in the very heart of Regent's Park. We have all the different communities. We have the large synagogues. We have the biggest mosque in London, and so on and so forth. And it used to be a very happy community. Right. And what's happened is...
I remember when the mosque opened in Regent's Park.
There you go.
It was a sort of a great addition to a very interesting area.
Yeah, and a phenomenal area. And it used to be a wonderful community.
Yeah.
But what's happened now is the poison that we had online is now spilled out onto the streets. And I know the Soho Theatre people very well, and they have glorious events there, all sorts of events every night, very, very successful.
Well, thankfully they're not having Paul Curry back.
No, well, exactly. And they came out and absolutely abhorrent what happened in those situations. I know a lot of the people involved. But what we have to do is absolutely, which you always do on this show, is call it out. Because what happens is how often a small group of people who spark this hatred, and that's the problem. I think if you look at the rest of the community working on that sort of principle, then we should get back to that sort of normality. But you're right, I think the undercurrent is deplorable, and we need to call it out.
And I mean, we saw earlier this week at Tobias Ellwood's house being sort of demonstrated outside by a bunch of people. It turns out led by the former Labour candidate in the last election. So you can't say, oh, it's just, Palestinian activists. I mean, she may or may not be a Palestinian activist, but she was also selected to be the Labour candidate. We've now got Wes Streeting, Labour frontbencher, senior member of the party. He had a vote for genocide poster put up in his constituency.
It's outrageous. And I think what we're seeing spilling out into the open is something that people who've been paying attention to this issue have seen growing for a long time, which is that you have this new anti-Semitism, which has all these horrendous faces to it. So you've got this sort of left anti-Semitism, which we've come to understand as has been going on in the Labour Party. You've got this kind of Islamist anti-Semitism, which has been brewing for some time. There's the old kind of fashioned right-wing anti-Semitism, although that's, to be honest, a kind of
blended into the background, hasn't it?
Form in all of this. Although it is interesting seeing Nick Griffin popping up and saying pro-Palestine things, tells you something.
But we need to be a lot tougher. We need to enforce the law. The law is there to protect people. It's not being enforced in the right sort of way. And as a result, what happens is it continues to spread. If you make sure that you stop the people early on, hit them with what the law says to prevent these sort of things, then you'll prevent further...
But I don't know about that, Andrew, because in a way, this is something you can't make laws about. Yes, you can stop people from being hateful. You can stop people from breaking laws which already exist.
Yes.
You can't stop people from thinking things.
I think that's also. I think we shouldn't rely on the law to tackle what's sometimes a kind of broader, like social, cultural problem. And I think actually people across British society need to take some responsibility for standing with British Jews and for standing up to this anti-Semitism. Because I think it's our own ignorance and complacency which has allowed this to grow. This has been going on for a very long time. Even before October the 7th, Jews were about 0.5% of the population. They represented a quarter of the religiously motivated hate crimes. That was a year before the attack.
Yes.
This has been going on for a very long time, but we've turned a blind eye to it.
And I think it's such a good point. You know, we have to stand up to these intimidation mobs. You know, people who threaten teachers, people who turn up at schools, people who threaten authors. We should say absolutely no way. We will not tolerate this in a free society.
And that's my point, because you need to find a solution. And education is helpful, so jaw, not war. But we do have laws already in place to make sure that we enforce that sort of side. And I think people are reluctant to go for the full strength of the law to stop some of it.
Question, is there a law against turning up outside someone's house? Because I'm actually not clear on that.
Well, if there's intimidation and so on and so forth, then...
Well, I think in the case of Tobias Ellwood, there should be.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that the police could have used a law, but instead of which they were like, well, we have to balance the kind of, the freedom of speech, and we have to worry about whether people's right to demonstrate is being impacted upon. I mean, in the old days of newspapers sort of, doorstepping madness, when you would, and it used to happen to Dominic Cummings, he would come out of his house every single day and there'd be hordes and hordes of journalists there, which is not quite the same as having hordes and hordes of demonstrators. And you can't really stop journalists, but you should be able to, as a private citizen, never mind as Tobias Ellwood, to say to the police, get this rabble away from it.
But we're so reliant on common decency that people don't cross those boundaries, that people respect that someone's home with their children, and that you don't go there. But I think that there is this new discourse, which is so vitriolic.
If you're fearing for your life, then that's absolutely wrong, and we need to be a lot tougher on that.
I don't think it should be as much as that. I don't think fearing for your life should be the line. I think, fearing for your family's safety should be fair enough. I mean, he's got young children inside a house. I mean, what is he supposed to tell them? Daddy, why are there loads of people outside screaming that you're a genocidal maniac?
Sure.
It's outrageous.
So what you need is clarity. The police need to be told this is what you need to do, to enforce the law on that sort of basis. Because if you don't do that, then there's that sort of, they're very worried about acting.
I don't think people have the right to demonstrate outside private homes.
I agree with you.
I just don't think they do.
I think the difficulty is that kind of norm that we have, which is there's certain places which are just no-go areas for protest. There's certain things that you don't do. There's certain things that won't endear people to your cause. Not just on the Palestine issue, but on so many other issues. That's completely gone now. People think that it's absolutely fair game. I don't think the law is the answer to that, but not least because of the fact, and as I know we're going to come on to, the law is being very selectively applied where these people are concerned. So I think we need a broader pushback against these people.
But also there's something that's gone slightly wrong as well with the general kind of tenet of society's mores. I was walking out just a little bit earlier on before the show, and there's some guy at the bottom of the escalator down by the bottom of the Shard there with a little table, two of them, very middle class, advertising for communism, going... have you had enough of capitalism? I said, not really. He went, would you like communism? I went, no. And I'm going, what the hell are we doing here? It's 6, 7 o'clock at night. You're standing in a relatively empty place trying to recruit people to the communist cause. Why?
It's their democratic right to do so. I mean, if anything, it tells you about how marginal...
I don't care that he's doing it, but I haven't seen anybody operating on behalf of the Communist Party in a street in London for quite a long time.
No, it tells you something about how marginal the old left are, really, though, to be honest. If it's two people in a trestle table, in a train station this time of night, it's a bit of a reminder of what kind of Anaraki almost hobby that part of politics has become.
But a lot of people are lost, and that's the problem. So you can appeal to people. They're looking for a saviour. So they're looking for the right party that's going to lead them. You need a strong leader who's going to get them out of this mess and so on and so forth.
But how much as well is down to the kind of the programming, if you like, or the propaganda that's been pushed through universities, because that's kind of where it started. We now know that it's running through the NHS. Doctors, pro-Palestinian doctors are here. We've also got quite a lot of people who have come from Palestine to be here. And I've made this point before, that there's a lot more people who have skin in the game, if you like, about Palestine than there used to be. Because, I will say back in the 70s, Andrew, you will remember this. Yes. But there were plenty of Middle East conflicts going on. Well, Yasser Arafat was knocking off planes 5 to the dozen. They were blowing up Jordan. They were blowing up Lebanon. There was the Golan Heights war. There wasn't anybody demonstrating in London saying this must stop. Israel is the devil.
No, exactly. And we used to, as I say before, we used to be a very tolerant community. But whatever's happened, that underlying current has basically spilled over. And I think that's the problem. It's incendiary and the language that's being spoken. But we do need to cut that out very early on.
But we saw it with the gender-critical feminists. I feel like it started with them. I mean, the way that the treatment that they were subjected to as if that they were somehow uniquely evil.
Yeah.
I mean, J.K. Rowling, I mean, one of the most thoughtful people imaginable, was suddenly recast as an ogre.
Yeah, yeah.
Because she expressed an opinion, and as soon as she did that, she became beyond the pale.
Right.
And you're seeing it in so many different areas now. There's not that respect for political difference anymore.
No.
It's not that they are your political opponent, they're your enemy.
Yeah, yeah.
To be vanquished.
Because they're right and you're wrong, and that's the problem. We've got to stop there for a moment. We'll have you guys back in very shortly, though. Rolling into the night, we are doing right here. This is the Independent Republican, Mike Graham. Do not go anywhere. Moving on, Labour's dubbed it Rishi's recession as the Prime Minister's pledge to grow the economy took a hit with today's figures. Experts say, though, the numbers aren't as bad for the Prime Minister or the public as they may seem. And let's see what the panel makes of the UK in recession. I mean, who knows? They might have all been cutting back and haven't bought anything for ages. But Tom's here, Candice is here, Andrew as well. Tom, I mean, the recession is not really a recession, is it? It's one of these economic recessions where the people say, well, there's been 2 quarters where there's been no growth or negative growth, so technically it's a recession. And Labour loves it.
No, they do. I mean, any excuse to bash the Tories, that's to be expected.
Yeah.
But as you say, I mean, really, this is just a sign of just the stagnation that we've started to see, which is bad enough. The fact that we had the terrible COVID years economically, and the fact that even though he made growth one of his main pledges, we've just been trundling along at the very bottom of the pile. And that's something which, surely that's good enough to go out rather than scaring everyone witless by talking about recession.
Yeah.
Yes, technically speaking, but even people at the FT, who are hardly friends of the Conservative Party these days, have said over the course of the past 24 hours, not.
And I didn't
previously
see the market suddenly falling off a cliff or anything like that. I mean, it wasn't particularly unexpected because there isn't any growth. There's nothing happening. Nobody's going to work. I mean, I said earlier, this ridiculous study that we found today where civil servants only want to go into work 2 days a week, don't even want to do 3. And there's 5 million people not making any contribution to society at all. So there's more people here who are less well off because there's too many of them not making any money.
No, absolutely. And that's one thing that you have heard Jeremy Hunt start to talk about, that problem of the amount of people who have been, it's a tragedy really, they've just been put out to pasture because it was easier to do so rather than to actually try and find a way to get them back into work.
Right.
There's a hell of a lot of potential that needs to be unlocked there. It's not the only thing, but it would certainly help. And it would also give a lot of meaning to those people's lives. There's whole cities now, there's like a quarter of the workforce which is out.
Right. Well, I mean, on a Monday or a Friday, you can
issues.
sort of, fire a cannon down, many of the main streets in the city and there's nobody there. Which is remarkable.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? Well, it does make the front page of the Financial Times. Tomorrow's front. They talk about the economy shrank 0.3% in the last quarter. It's a blow to the PM for his promise of growth, because we always remember the 5 promises that he made. Inflation was always going to be an easy one.
Well, you might remember them. I've forgotten them all, to be honest.
But it's all about stop the boats. People always remember that one. And I think when he promised
going so well, wasn't it?
He promised to halve inflation when it was 11, over 11%, and clearly that's going to happen. Less headroom for tax cuts is what they're saying, which is going to be reality. But I think you're right. You have to peddle the narrative, and it depends at what stage you do it.
Yeah.
It will get better.
I think are we not in a position, Candice, where people just see it from their own perspective? If you've got less money than you had last year, it's not good. If you're managing to stay about the same, you're okay.
Yeah, but maybe it's just the phase of life I'm in right now where people have mortgage and childcare costs. I just feel like people are at the edge of their budgets. They are straining their budgets. I mean, financial resilience is low.
Right.
I mean, you hear people who have good jobs and they're responsible and they say, I have to think very carefully about what I spend my money on now.
I mean, I know people who have moved out of London because their mortgage kind of quadrupled and they just couldn't afford it. And they were like, we've got to sell the house and got to move out. And these were not, people who were particularly badly off.
No.
But they were just like literally priced out of the market.
Because everything's gone up at once. So, say you got those extra mortgage costs, maybe you could handle it, but your energy bill's gone up, your food bill's gone up, your petrol bill's gone up, your taxes have gone up.
Yeah.
Everything, your local
Your blood pressure's gone up. All these sort of
That's
things.
right. And you can't see a doctor to get your blood pressure down. I mean, we were talking to Angela Knight a bit earlier about British Gas and their massive profits today, and I always struggle to understand anyone who works in the energy sector. They always kind of somehow cover their backs by saying, oh, well, it's not really what it looks like. Well, sorry, they made 10 times as much money in profit. Meanwhile, we're all paying through the nose for very, very expensive energy. and we're just getting stooped every single turn.
And it's an obscene amount of money. It's just an unfortunate fact that given the way that the market is structured and given the way that these things work, they profit enormously off of the misery of everyone
But they
else.
always profit. It's not like, you know, they made a loss last year, so they're just making up for it. No, they didn't make as much of a profit, but they still made a profit.
And it's always the juxtaposition of the misery, and whether it's heating or eating, and next to the horrendous profit or the great profits.
Well, we spoke. I mean, we used to speak to people, pensioners, who would ring into the show and tell us that, you know, I can't really put the heating on today because I'm not sure that I could afford to do it. Okay. They were being given some money by the government, but you know, the fact that we're subsidising these companies and they're making 700 million quid can't be right, can it?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. Sorry.
No, what were you going to say?
No, I think it's one of those things where clearly this balance needs to be redressed. I get there's a certain element within the Conservative Party who scream blue murder as long as you talk about thinking, is there a way in which we can actually take these profits and make less of the burden on ordinary people? But surely when it's this extreme, and also it's not as if people are being provided with a fantastic service these days, or also the fact that even before we had the sky-high prices of experience, they have been ticking up anyway as a consequence of government policy as well, because of the sort of energy policy.
Well, because all the things that you see on the bill, which are added in by the government, you have to pay the green tax and you have to pay the standing charge and this and that and the other, and you're kind of going, well, you know, where is all this money coming from?
And what about us? You know, all we want is cheap and abundant energy. And I mean, you have all this obstructionism in politics, you know, that, for instance, this irrational fear of nuclear. And, you know, all these plants that could have been operational by now were blocked years ago.
Yeah, by Nick Clegg.
We could have a much better energy supply.
I never liked that guy.
Is that right?
I mean, there was never anything good about him. But this is the thing, you know, we just, and you know, this windfall tax idea where you sort of say, oh, well, we'll make sure we get them to give us back the tax. Well, that doesn't help us because we don't see any of it. You know, all we get is loaned money by the government, which is actually our money.
And it's always deja vu.
And then we give it to them, they give it back to the government. Yeah. We're the ones that end up with nothing.
Yeah. I think the thing is, it's also, I can understand the allure of it in a situation where they're making these obscene profits. I think we can take that, we've got public coffers to fill, I get that. The problem is the longer term problem is there, which is we haven't invested in energy security, plentiful energy, nuclear, it's 10 years, that's far too long to wait. Ridiculous short-term thinking. That's what definitely needs to be addressed more than the palliatives, as you say.
Well, one of the reasons the American markets are doing better and the American economy is actually growing is because they've got cheaper energy costs.
Yes, that's exactly the point I was going to make. And so much of our inflation is because we're very, very vulnerable to spikes because we don't have our own energy supply. So, I mean, so much of what we do actually isn't driven by consumer demand. It's problems with the supply.
And you always need to look at the whole picture, as you say. So look at the knock-on effect. And so America's a really good example of that stuff. But we always have the story, as I say, it's always the juxtaposition of these massive, massive profits and the misery that's caused. But nobody comes up with a solution.
No, nobody does because they don't want to. Let's talk about far more important matters. Nutella Lawson, in this week of Pancake Tuesday, says that putting Nutella on a pancake is vulgar.
Outrageous.
Well, I mean, she should know. I mean, there's quite a lot of vulgarity around Nigella Lawson. I mean, I've never ceased to amaze me how she manages to turn a cooking show into kind of a sex festival. You know, it's quite remarkable.
She's glorious like that. But you put whatever you like.
I do like
pancakes.
her. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Nutella. For me, it's like children's food, isn't it?
I was having lunch with James Whale today, and he says he has his Nutella and he eats it with a spoon straight out of the jar.
Really?
I think it's fantastic. So do all that sort of stuff. But I put Marmite on croissant and bits and pieces. I do.
Well, I suppose if you like Marmite, you put it on anything.
That's fine. and you absolutely have whatever you like. There's no way that Nigella should tell us what we should eat and what we shouldn't.
I was told we were having ice cream with pancakes.
That's what you want.
What was requested, and that's what we had.
Hot cross buns and Marmite. That's good as well. Absolutely.
So she's a purist. It's only lemon and sugar, is it?
Lemon and sugar, which is very much the French thing. But actually, if you go to Paris and you have those creperies in the street, they'll do you a Nutella one. Because, you know...
They'll do you a savoury one.
And they'll do you a savoury one.
Maple syrup was
there's a very famous crepe van. I think it's probably still outside the Fourth pub in Scotland, in Hampstead rather, which I used to go to when I was a teenager. That's how long it's been there. It's very good. And my mother, being Scottish, used to do stewed apples with
that's nice.
Which was actually really nice.
No, absolutely.
That was a staple of ours. And I will say this to people, you know, if you haven't, because we didn't have that much money, you haven't got any money, you can stew apples. And it's a brilliant, you know, dessert.
And oranges and things like that you have with a crepe, don't you?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, have whatever you like. Have whatever you like with your food. Nobody should tell you what to eat.
Yes, absolutely right. Let's have a look at what's been going on down in Sydney, because apparently Pink has had a few problems. Her entourage and she refused entry because they presumably didn't recognise her?
Yeah,
it's always a bit embarrassing.
Everybody knows Pink.
Well, yeah. It's very 2010, though. I mean, I haven't heard from her in a long time. I didn't know she was still going, actually.
Well, she booked it for 15 people. Yeah. She went in with the "do you know who I am" routine. Yeah. They didn't. Right. So they said, "You don't have ID. I'm afraid you have to go."
Was it an age policy? Because that was one. Because I do wonder. This is one thing you run into in this country all the time. Yeah. People have challenge 25, challenge 30, 35, 40, 50. I don't know where it's going to stop. Right. But it does become this ridiculous situation. I remember once queuing to get into a pub in Camden, because it was that busy. Yeah. And there was a Geordie couple in front of me, must have been there sort of like late 50s. Yeah. They got asked for ID to be put through the scanner. They had none.
They didn't have it.
Because they're in the late 50s. Right. They got turned away. So it's
There's nothing worse than being turned away when you've been waiting ages.
Well, especially she booked, so the Manly Skiff Sailing Club, as we all know it well, and 15 people she booked when they wouldn't let her go in. It's bizarre, isn't it?
But she didn't
the best part of the story is the name of the place she was trying to get into, which is the Manly Skiff Sailing Club.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, only in Australia. You know.
We love it. We've got Manly enough.
Very good. I haven't been there, as it turns out, but she turned up with 15 people in an entourage. That's proper rock and roll. That's even more than I have, has to be said. Now, Plank of the Week returns tomorrow night from 7 p.m. Here's a flavour of what you can expect. You wouldn't be surprised to know that we've got a sneak peek at Humza Yousaf's holiday. And here he is. Have a look, from Qatar.
Oh.
I love this. You can never tire of seeing this. Never tire of it. There he goes. I think we need to play that again. Chuck, I think let's have another look, because it wasn't very noisy, that one. Here he goes. This is obviously not actually in Qatar. This is in the Scottish Parliament. You can recognise it by that very expensive wood panelling. And he just can't catch a break, the poor guy. I mean, it's one of my favourite clips. We use it every time Humza Yousaf is ever nominated. Yeah. And to be fair, he's nominated for a good reason this week. I mean, notwithstanding the uselessness of his rule in Scotland, he's decided to go on holiday to Qatar.
Yes.
In the middle of this, you know, war between Israel and Palestine and the Gaza Strip. He's gone to the place where the top knobs of Hamas actually live, where they're negotiating supposedly with possibly the heads of the government in Qatar, and possibly the Americans, and possibly the Israelis, in a place which, you know, is so anti-everything that he talks about, you know, anti-women, anti-gay, you know, completely and utterly, you know, Islamic fundamentalism.
And the opulence and wealth. I mean, that's one thing about those Hamas chiefs who've been holed up there for so many years, is these guys have got multi-billion-dollar property in that country. It's absolutely absurd.
It is glorious, however, Qatar. I would recommend that people do go and visit it, because it's...
Listen, if you've been paid off by Qatar, you won't be back. So, you know, you can keep your mouth shut about that. People can make their own judgments. Thank you very much. You're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Next up, we look at the woke new names for London transport lines and all the top lines in tomorrow's newspapers. Do not go anywhere.
The world of woke.
Now, what do you do if your organisation is in a financial black hole and in debt to the tune of billions of pounds? Well, if you're Sadiq Khan, the self-appointed saviour of Britain's capital city, you spend even more money. Another 6 million, to be precise. But don't worry, it's not going to be spent on making anything better. Transport for London, the public sector money drain responsible for running buses, tubes, cycle lanes and ULEZ fines, is hanging by a thread. Because despite all the strikes, despite all the public money that's been wasted, and despite the overcrowding, Khan thinks the thing that really needs sorting out is, wait for it, providing woke names for the railway lines. Until today, the Overground, a network of train lines that link all the stations in outer London with the centre outside of the tube network, was called just that, the Overground. But no more. Sadiq has decided to rename all the lines and give them all different colours. So now, instead of travelling on the Overground, you will be on the Liberty line, the Lioness line, the Mild May line, Suffragette line, the Weaver line, and, of course, the Windrush line. So what, you might say, and you might be right, except for the fact that he's charging you and me, the taxpayer, the 6 million quid for the privilege. Most of that cost will be to change all the maps and will be spent on extra printing fees. And where does he get the front for this? And where has he got the money from? Social media was awash with suggestions of lines that he could have provided instead of the woke ones on his list. I mean, where is the Palest line, where Free Palestine gets chanted on every train, or the Nightmare line, which obviously speaks for itself? Given what's about to happen there, could have been a strike line, which would basically never be operational. And then there's the pickpocket special, the stab central, and the sexual assault line. Oh no, That's, of course, the entire network. Susan Hall, the former leader of the Conservative Party at the London Assembly, who's now running to unseat him at the election, was equally scathing. She said 1,000 people have been killed under his mayoralty, and yet Sadiq Khan is only interested in this virtue signalling nonsense. The only surprise is he hasn't named one of them the Sadiq line.
The world of woke.
I mean, the suggestions were absolutely coming thick and fast today on all of the different versions of, you know, I mean...
We lost about half a day to that in the Spikes office, to be honest. We're coming up with, like, the county line.
Yes.
County line.
Shamima line.
The picket lines I'm hearing.
The picket line's very good. The asinine line.
We had 3 palace lines. That's
I think they
You
suggested
could have the lines of cocaine. I mean, there's a lot of that going on in London. It is absolutely mad, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
Also, the fact that the overground was actually, I thought, a very useful way to get around. Yeah. And it was very easy to read the map because you could see... Now it's going to be ridiculously kind of complicated as you go from one part of the suffragette line through the Liberty line, you know, to get to whatever it is you're going.
The lioness line.
Is that what they were saying? 6 million?
Yeah, but mostly because they're going to have to spend it on all the printing. Because don't forget, even though we live in a digital age, every station has to have a map. Yeah, so they're going to have to change all of it.
They should do digital screens which you can then update as appropriate. You can show where the closures are.
They should. Somebody probably just smashed them though, because there's a vandal line as well that they could have done, and the graffiti line.
I love this because if you think about it, originally it was supposed to be it's just the place names or it's got something to do with the royal family. But now it's open season, so next time if it ever happens we get another Tory mayor, it'll just be tipped.
Well, there will be a Charles line, won't there? Because there's an Elizabeth line. We had Thatcher line. There you go.
I know.
It will just be
line in the sand. You know. Anyway, how about rotten to the core? Let's go to the papers. The Sun investigates today. This is a shocking story, and you'll see that it's related to trains. So we moved smoothly on there with the transitional into. This is the ASLEF Drivers Union. Which is being described as a predatory boys' club. The Sun have got their hands on quite an explosive report where women basically are being treated as sex objects, shockingly, by trade unionists.
It's awful. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 4, they say.
It just gets so much more depressing.
I know.
Does train travel get any more grim and depressing? It's the absolute worst now. It's like my expectations are so low. They're through the floor. I mean, I will say with some of this stuff, when people start saying institutional sexism, misogyny, immediately I get a bit sceptical because, you know, an allegation can go so far these days.
Yes. And 1 in 4 women is quite a lot, though.
That is awful. And they say 60% didn't complain because they thought nothing would be done. I'm not quite sure how you know that they didn't complain, unless you ask them, did you not complain?
Well, I think they did. They basically did a sort of study of members of this union who did not make... It was outside of any complaint they made to the police. So, so anything that was less serious than something reported to the cops, I guess. So it is your everyday kind of, you know, showing porn to people and a bit of groping.
It is awful. And
sort of thing that you didn't think happened anymore.
No. Yeah. But I think, just to pick up on Candy's point, the difficulty is when you have these big studies, is that often you'll find that you've got the really serious allegations of harassment and sexual assault and even, you know, showing pornography to people. And then you see, it's even mentioned in the story, cases of people being belittled in front of co-workers or told off. So I think that's the difficulty, is whenever you have an investigation into something like this, which you should, of course, have an investigation into, there's this desire to not just say, here's a discrete problem, let's deal with it. It's the worst ever. You conflate all kinds of things. I think that's always a bit...
I mean, part of the problem, as I said earlier, is that they're always on strike, so they've got nothing much to do, really. So they don't sit around abusing each other and belittling each other. Maybe they should get back to work.
Yeah, I think so.
Swines. Now, there's a very interesting story on the front page of the Metro I'd like to point you towards. Male fertility breakthrough, baby boom, and apparently they've discovered that there's something called immotile sperm, which doesn't move and therefore is completely useless. An ultrasound can apparently make it swim.
Well, what I loved was they say increased movement by up to 266%. I'm not quite sure if it doesn't move at all, then it's more than 266%. Because it's not moving.
6% of zero,
But no, it's a great story, isn't it? Because they're sort of turning around the medical advancements, seismic medical advances they're doing.
Well, they are. If in fact it leads to a higher level of births, then that's all fine and dandy, because it is very low at the moment. However, I just wonder how it's going to work, because they're talking about frequencies of 400 or 40 megahertz, higher than the level used in pregnancy. But when do you zap it, though? Because presumably, if it doesn't move, you have to zap it before it moves. So you have to zap it before intercourse? I mean, do you have to give it a go before you...
And it says it takes 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, how is it?
Yeah, exactly.
And you had the science boffin in the room with you, waiting.
I mean, or do you just make it move and then wait for it to move by itself?
I wonder. I think it depends on the treatment.
I mean, I'm sorry.
It's very...
Yeah.
Well, you've got IVF, so that's where they remove an egg and they the sperm, and then you've got things like IUI. So that's where they shoot sperm inside. So maybe that could be used to make that more successful. I'm not sure.
Yes. I'm just puzzled as to the way it would actually work.
After 20 seconds, they say 59% of those who didn't move at all would suddenly move.
Yeah, but presumably they don't move forever, though. They just move for a small amount of time, but then they stop again. I don't know. I'm obviously, as you can tell, I'm not a scientist.
How immotile is immotile? That's
exactly. I mean, is it a permanent move? Is it just a temporary one?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions.
A lot of questions for the story.
But there are these phrases like lazy sperm and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, lazy husbands. I mean, it's one of those things. What about Paul McCartney? Apparently very happy.
Story.
I suppose for the headline alone, you have to read it out. Inside the Sun, they've done a big spread. It was a long and winding road while Macca gently wept for his guitar, but obla joy, it's got back to where it once belonged. Now he's got to hide his love away.
We love every single lyric.
Yeah.
1961, they said it was originally stolen, apparently, and it's been reunited. It was found in a loft. Apparently,
amazing.
This wonderful bass guitar. They reckon it was worth 10 million, or is worth 10 million now. I'm not quite sure how they do that, but maybe...
Do you think he's bought it back from whoever found it in their loft? That could be...
were recompensed for their...
You would like to think so.
How did they get hold of it? Because you always hear these stories. It's always in someone's loft, you know, where they find some first folio that got stolen from some university somewhere, and suddenly it, like, turns up, and you think, how did that make its way into your loft?
There are some strange things in lofts, though. I mean, I found a letter in my loft. Well, actually, one of my kids did, which was from, like, somebody that had formerly lived there. And so it had just been sort of left in a box. There was this box of stuff. So people do leave things in lofts.
Was it a letter from Paul McCartney?
Unfortunately not. And I don't think it was worth anything like 10 million quid. I'm looking forward to burning it at the next, the next cremation of some stuff from leaves from the garden. But, yeah, so good luck. Always look in a loft. It's always worth checking.
I love that. It's going to be good.
Paintings, guitars, anything like that. Hunt feeling the squeeze on cuts. And then that was the story we talked about very briefly. Extremist migrants are now considered to be a threat. I've been saying this for years.
You have.
You know, I don't know why it takes them so long to work this stuff out. But anyway, listen, thank you very much indeed. We've got through as many stories as we can. We will see you again, I'm sure, very, very soon. That's all from me tonight, though. You've been watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Thank you to my guests, Candice, Andrew and Tom, of course. I'll see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. With Plank of the Week. And you can also see me and Andrew Eborn, actually, on The World According to Mike Graham at 11:30 tomorrow night. It's all only on Talk TV. Don't go away. See you later.